The biggest problem with beginners when they're turning is that they're not looking at the right place. They're either looking in front or they're looking at the asphalt instead of looking at the turn itself. Here's an example of what most beginners see when turning. They see the house in front, the sidewalk, the asphalt right in front of the car. Now here's what a more experienced driver sees. They look into the curve itself, they know how sharp the curve is, if any of those people is going to start crossing the street, and so on. Basically, they're looking far into the turn. Of course, you have to scan well in front before you look there. But when you've determined that everything is safe, look far into the turn. And don't look at the asphalt too close to the car either. Lift your eyes and look at the horizon. The reason why most students tend to look too close to the car is because they have a tendency to protect their bubble. They think that if they don't look close, where there are things that they could hit, that they're going to hit them, the parked cars for example, the sidewalk, or any other obstacle, like these flower pots in this case. Most of the time, it's the opposite that happens. If you stare at things, you'll have a tendency to go towards them. So again, look at where you want to go at the horizon. Also, notice here that now I'm looking through my left window. Beginners in a situation like this tend to still be looking in front of them through the windshield at the wall of the building in front. Then as I straighten the car, I look through the windshield again. And that goes for all left turns that are about 90 degrees or more. Like here, I'm about to turn left at a 90-degree curve and I'm looking through my left window, watching the curve as it appears. As soon as I can see the end of the street, I'm looking there. My car is at 45 degrees in the intersection, but I'm already looking at the end of the street, not in front of me. In other words, I don't wait until my car is straight to look at the end of the street. Looking in front of you in this case is like having your left window painted black. You have no idea where you're going, how sharp the turn is, if there are parked cars, people crossing the street, and so on. In turns that are less wide, like in this case, I do look through the windshield, but I look at the turn as it appears, as far as I can see it, and again, I don't look straight in front of me. With right turns, you look more through the windshield, unless they're very sharp turns, which I'll discuss in another video. So that's basically what you have to do. Look at the turn as it appears. In this case, I see it appearing behind this concrete block, so I keep looking there. And as soon as I can see far ahead, I look there. And don't be afraid to turn your head when you're turning. Most students just look straight ahead when turning, keeping their head aligned with the front of the car. And when I tell them to look further into the turn, instead of turning their head, they just look from the corner of their eye, like they're scared of looking or something. Turn your head. Again, it's the same thing you do in everyday life when you want to look at something. If I want to see what's written on the wall to my right, I turn my head and I look at it. When I get out of some place, I turn my head and look where I want to go. That's what we always do already instinctively. But when beginners start driving, because of that tendency to protect their bubble, they don't do it anymore. In this turn here, my car is still pointed forward, but my head is already turned to the left. Then I turn, and at the end of the turn, the front of the car aligns itself with my head. An analogy I like to use with my students is the battle tank. You've probably noticed how battle tanks sometimes turn their turret first. The turret is the head. It looks where it wants to go, and then the body of the tank aligns itself with it. Same thing when you're turning. Turn your head, look at the right place, and then the front of the car will align itself with your head. And don't wait until you're already in the turn to start analyzing it. You should start doing that from as far as you can see the turn. Like here, from this distance, I've already determined that I can turn right because there's a house there, so my only option is to turn left, and it's more or less a 90-degree turn. So I already have an idea of how I'll negotiate that turn. Then here, looking as far as I can, and here, already looking at the end of the street. Now if you practice with relatives or friends, they'll put too much emphasis on your hands. They'll just keep telling you to turn the wheel more. And sometimes your hands might be the problem, but most of the time, the problem is where you're looking. As long as you're not looking at the right place, your hands can't do much to help you. I'm not saying that your parents or friends are not good drivers, but looking at the right place is something they've been doing instinctively for so many years that they don't even realize it anymore. Now remember that when turning, you should always turn in the first available lane. A question I get a lot from my students is, how do I know if there are any parked cars, or the lane is reserved, or blocked by construction, or whatever? Well, by looking. And again, the reason why they don't see that, or see it at the last second, is because they're looking in front when turning, instead of looking at the turn itself. If you're waiting at a red light, like it was the case here, you should determine that even before you go. You have time, remember? You stopped at a red light. So while looking at the right place might be the most obvious thing for experienced drivers, It's the single most common problem with beginners when turning. Now, even with this knowledge, your reflex will probably be to look straight in front of you again. It might take you a few practices until looking at the right place becomes a natural reflex, but once you do, you should see a big improvement. And just as a side note, there are mainly 3 types of people who will have a better global vision when they start driving: cyclists, people who play video games, and people who practice sports. Don't worry, if you don't do any of these, doesn't mean you'll be a bad driver. I'll discuss this more in detail in an upcoming video on vision.